Hi everyone, welcome to our panel discussion this morning, which I think promises to be very interesting given the subject, which is, does culture need the internet? And as Suni told me a little earlier, that's a bit of a no-brainer, which of course it does, but we are going to discuss in what ways and what are the pitfalls, etc. Since Dinesh has already introduced everyone, I won't waste any more time on introductions, so we can get straight into the panel discussion. Before we actually start the discussion, I'd like each of the panelists to just tell us very briefly if they think the cultural world should engage very actively with the online world or not. So Suni, would you like to start?
Hi everybody. Yeah, as I said, for me it's a no-brainer because I think the internet is just the most amazing thing that has happened, and it's really the future. And from the first time that I started engaging with the internet to now, I mean, at the very basic level as a photographer, the fact that I can send my pictures to people sitting at home over my computer is a huge step for me. I'm enough of a kind of dinosaur to have been part of two technologies, analog as well as digital, and non-internet world as well as the internet world. And so I can compare both. And for me personally, I think it really is the future.
Alka?
Well, I'll take off from where Suni said dinosaur. I felt a dinosaur 14 years ago when I'd gone for my postdoctoral to Goldsmiths College and went to the library and asked them, where is the catalog? And they pointed me to the computer. And you know, all of you are very young here. You won't believe that 14 years ago, internet had really not become part of our everyday. It's as recent as 14 years. And I again looked at the computer and I was wondering where the catalog was, because I'm used to looking at cards and going number wise, and it took me a little bit of a while that at the real click of a mouse you got down reams of books to just see what you wanted. Today, 14 years down the line, internet has become part of almost the everyday, dinosaurs or no dinosaurs. We just need to flap our wings and, you know, clumsily go on to the internet because that's the only way forward. Since I've got this little chance to give a little input, I was also thinking of, when we talk of culture, we also talk of cyber culture. In visual arts, when we are saying cyber culture, what are we talking about? It's really a rhizomic way of thinking, the way we think the post-structuralist way in visual culture. In the same way, we have to immediately think of cyber culture and think of, you know, coming in through Korea really, because cyber culture really began with Lee Soo-man, who started the cyber culture industry by training musicians and getting them to stay in a place and then training them in different ways of singing so that they become international kind of entertainment industry called the SM entertainment industry. And all kinds of technologies then started coming in, nanotechnology, cyber technology. And culture then has actually started living in a virtual space. Often as a curator, sometimes, in contemporary culture, it's become so important to really be inclusive today of the word culture, because there's high culture, there's low culture, there's popular culture, there is different, what culture are we talking of? And then of course celebrating the Derridian différence of culture. So sitting in New Delhi, we have to be linked with cultures of different nations, and as you see, that is happening with the Delhi Photo Festival as well. With the kind of people who are coming in, we did everything. We did all our judging through virtual space, because all the material came through virtual realities. And then you have augmented realities, and you're looking at various realities. So today, cyber culture has become really very, very challenging. And for people of my generation who have actually lived from the fax to telegrams to now having WhatsApp and Instagram. I mean, sometimes you keep wondering, where is technology going to stop, and how are you going to, you know, keep on keeping pace with just the click of a button? So from kind of visual representation to surveillance, for all of you who were here yesterday, it was very interesting to see how Chris Pinney used the Aadhaar card as a means of really looking at technology, culture, and identity. And these are very important issues which all of us actually are struggling with today. Photographers, visual artists, curators. When we're looking at identity and culture, it is definitely the internet, from website to artists to seeing works to even curating. Now even curating is being done in virtual spaces, and you do the layout, and at the press of the internet everything's done. So sometimes the curator hasn't even to be present at the exhibition because everything has been done, and at the drop of a button, the whole layout of the gallery, how many square foot of space for which artist, it's a virtual space.
So I can see many fans of the internet between on this table. Let's go straight to the person who is from the internet. That's Amit from Google. And I have a couple of questions for you, Alka, later. Yeah.
Let me see if this works. Yeah. So I'm not from the internet. It's not like not from the future or something like that.
Google is the internet and Google is God, etc. So
thank you. That's a great introduction. The man from the internet. I'll remember that one. But you know, I agree obviously with, you know, Alka and Soni and everyone here. I think obviously I have to agree, even if I, you know, think, for me, I think the main thing is that the question of does the internet need culture or the culture need internet, it's actually, you know, it's both ways, because I think there have been a lot of industries that have been disrupted by the arrival of the web and by digital technologies. And I think the cultural sector, so to speak, has a great opportunity because it is a sector that can engage with the internet rather than, you know, get disrupted without having any control over it. And I think that's really what we're trying to do, which is like have conversations with cultural sector, museums, foundations, artists, and try and see how do they want to represent their works on the web? How do they want to, you know, create space with all the noise that's there on the internet? So really carving out a space for good, high quality, authoritative cultural content is, I think, our biggest challenge right now on the web.
Suni, let's start with you, since this is the photo festival. With the coming of the internet, everybody is a photographer today. I mean, and as a professional photographer yourself, this democratization of photography, do you think it's a good thing, or are there certain pitfalls attached to it?
Well, theoretically, it's a very good thing, and I'm totally for it. I love that everyone's a photographer and everyone has the means to be a photographer. Fortunately for me, I'm not a professional in the sense that I don't depend on photography to earn my living. I'm a screenwriter, and that's what I do to make a living. So I'm in a very fortunate space. However, if I was trying to be a professional photographer in this space, I think it would have been even more problematic perhaps than when I was doing it, you know, 20 years ago. Because as you said, everyone's a photographer, so how do you distinguish yourself? In the non-commercial space, I think in the commercial space, not everyone is a photographer. You do need training, you do need studios, you do need lights, you need to be trained, but in the sphere of documentary photography, for example, yes, everyone is a photographer.
So is it a good thing for aspiring photographers to just go on Instagram and be able to control their picture in like 30 seconds, which would probably take a photographer from earlier, you know, hours in the dark room, getting it all right, etc.?
You know, what
so
is really fortunate now is that you can share photographs. When I was a photographer, one of the things that I used to really long for is a way to share my work. And you could never share it unless you had photos in a photo show or you had a book. Both were very prohibitive for a photographer who was starting out. So you could share it with your friends who you were physically with. Now what Instagram has done, what Facebook has done, is that you can get feedback on your work from millions if you choose to. And I think that's a very nice thing, for me at least. And so I'm a very avid Instagrammer.
You are, okay.
Yeah.
Amit, you talked about, this whole noise on the internet and trying to do something which can be distinguished from this noise. So that's the other problem that a lot of people feel when it comes to the internet, and when we're talking of something like culture, there's a sort of explosion of information, and there's an explosion of just things coming at you. But understanding or getting knowledge or being able to really get into something, that seems very difficult on the internet. Why is that so?
Well, our attention span is reducing, right? I mean, my colleagues, from Google here in India are, looking at their phone probably, 20 times in a conversation with me. All of us are always checking something. So we've kind of gone from this, society that, perhaps has been a little lethargic in its consumption of information to being completely, rabid, kind of we want data and we want information all the time. So how do you make sense of it? Well, you can't, to be honest. You should let it happen, because people will start filtering for themselves what they want, and controlling what a user should get is actually the worst idea. Making all the options available and then allowing the user to filter is the most important thing. So let's take Delhi Photo Festival, right? So when we met them a while back, there's been a lot of information about Delhi Photo Festival on the web. There's on Google image search, you can find small little images. But there hasn't been an authoritative, curated exhibition about the Delhi Photo Festival. So we worked with them to create these exhibitions, which are up on the screen, and you can see them later, because I think the internet is a little bit weak here. But what they've done is they've taken the images and they've provided some kind of background, context, and curation around those images. So now when you're going to search Delhi Photo Festival based on, in a few months or something, this is going to pop up as a search result, right? So this is the only way to kind of fight that noise, is to actually come out there as an institution or as an artist and be authoritative. Because if you try to fight it, it's not going to work. You have to, adapt with them.
Right. Alka, as somebody who's been so deeply involved in culture and art for so many years, one of the things that people keep talking about is also that art seems, for a lot of ordinary people, art seems very intimidating, Nobody can kind of understand it very easily. So can the internet help in some ways in demystifying it and, making it more accessible and more sort of understandable? Or does it just compound the problem?
I think, Poonam, it's already done that with blogs, with, even online sales, for example. The distance between the producer and the consumer has reduced. And this whole thing of being overawed by the white cube of the gallery space, which I think was deliberately, in a manner of speaking, done to bring art to a very elitist level. So the minute you enter, your voice drops. The minute you go there, you kind of sit and look at the painting and you kind of do all those things. So that there is a whole culture of that, There was a very interesting essay, I'm forgetting which cultural reader had it, how do you dress for an opening? So, these are all these things which were done there, but with the internet, that distance has already been reduced. There are artists who are setting up their websites, they are sharing their work, they have their homepage, every gallery has a website, so if you want to even know the stable of artists of each gallery, it's there. Information has just crossed beyond any kind of limit. So I think that gap has already, there's no gap.
I just want to add one quick thing to what Alka just said. When we started the art project, for those of you who don't know it, it was not an easy job to convince the first 17 museums, because the ones we were trying to convince were the Tate, the Met, MoMA, and we went for the large institutions mainly because we said that if the large ones agree to a concept like this, and all of them kind of got onto this idea actually to break down barriers of access. That was the key point. They didn't care about any of the other stuff too much. Their key message was art for too long has kind of been this, segment that has not got the populist, kind of groupings around it. And they are looking for new audiences coming from India, China, Brazil, Russia to come on the internet and explore their collections.
It's interesting you referred to international audiences, because one of the big things about the internet is, of course, that it links people across continents and countries. And when it comes to, say, India and the entire Indian diaspora, which is all over the world, and which I think sometimes tries even harder to keep in touch with their cultural roots more than us living here. Do you see the internet as a way to actually, strengthen cultural bonds with your home country?
Definitely, and I think that's kind of our key message is that, since the art project launched with just 17 museums, it now has 256 in 44 countries. And these 256 museums are there because they want to represent their culture. They want to represent it on a global platform. So I think having Indian institutions, having Indian artists, embrace the web to tell their stories is critical, because the other countries are doing it. And they're doing it very, very aggressively and actively.
May I say something?
Yes, please.
We've just talked about the wonder that is the internet, but I have a few things that is the opposite, which is that we live in a very fortunate position now that we have both the internet and we have what you call hard copies. So, you can actually see things on the net, and then you can come to the Delhi Photo Show and see prints, or you can read digitized libraries, but you still have libraries with books. I am afraid that in the future, the hard part is going to eventually disappear, and we are only going to be left with the net. And that will be a very unfortunate thing, I think.
I agree.
Do you?
I agree that, all the stuff, sorry, I just wanted to clarify. When we did the Starry Night in MoMA, it's in high resolution gigapixel, a lot of the journalists, when we launched it, asked us, are you trying to replicate the physical viewing experience of art? And we said, you cannot, because even if you try, so for 1 year there was this debate in the international media saying this project is trying to, take out the physical viewing. In the last 6 months, the museum attendance figures have jumped by over 30% globally by the art newspaper. It's the strongest year for people actually visiting museums. So I think we should never stop the physical, because that's critical, but
that
let this supplement
books.
it. It includes books, but we haven't done much with books on this project. So ours has been mostly on photography and art as yet so far.
Right.
I just want to add to that. I think I'm an eternal optimist, and I think in spite of Kindle, in spite of where books go, I think the publishing industry is still flourishing. There are more books being done. I, for one, just can't stand the Kindle, even though I have people sitting next to me on airplanes and on the buses in London looking at Kindle. It's a bit dizzying, and there are lots of people who love the smell of paper, who want to turn the things, they want to read a book at night. And I think technology is just adding a dimension. It's not erasing it, because one end, I love my books, but when I'm looking at some information, or if I'm ordering a book, I'll go to Flipkart. But I want my book. So I think technology is adding to it instead of eroding it, probably. Of course, in every society which is developing, anything which develops, there is a corrosion and thing. Even with globalization, the old butcher is gone in certain places. But, in societies like ours, we still have that. So I think technology probably adds.
When we are talking of the internet, we can't avoid a certain aspect of it vis-a-vis culture. Things like books and art and music, etc. They're also expressions of creativity. And the internet is, as we all know, a very fertile ground for bullies and trolls. And one of the first things that get attacked are free expression on the internet, whether it's a painting or a photograph or a book or whatever. So how does that happen? Because earlier, maybe you had a book, somebody criticized it, and that was that. But now it's like open season. So you can't escape this part of the internet also when it comes to expressions of your creativity. Suni, would you like to say something on that?
Yeah, I suppose it comes with the territory, and you've just got to be ready to deal with it. Because
how do you deal with it?
You deal with it as an artist as you deal with bad reviews. You choose to ignore them.
But there's a difference between bad reviews and trolling. A bad review could be, I didn't like this because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
A troll will just abuse.
Well, there are vicious reviewers as well.
Yeah, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's not like a mob out to lynch
I've
you.
not faced that situation, thankfully.
I don't mean personally. But
Yeah, I don't know how one would deal with it. I guess get off Twitter.
Let me try and see if I can add some perspective. I think you're right, by the way, about the trolls, but I don't think trolls are professional critics. You know, they're usually
No, of course not.
Yeah, exactly. They're just people, you know, usually who
What
want
I'm
to
saying
bully.
is that creative expression is one of the first targets. You know, it's like a soft target.
The key is thick skin. And let me explain to you what I mean by this. It's obviously humorous, but
I wish
it's also
we were all blessed.
no,
with
but
that.
I don't have a very thick skin. But the people I see with thick skin are people, right? And when you see a new video being launched, right, you should read the comments.
Yes.
But you should also see the change in the comments, what starts happening after a time. So let's
After
take.
how many comments?
Let me explain to you about Gangnam Style, right? Gangnam Style, we all know now. Gangnam Style, very famous South Korean thing. When it first came out, it had initial comments. The trolls will always come and say something nasty, right? But the voice of the majority drowns out the trolls if the thing is actually accepted. Now, it might take some time. It might take a few weeks, might take a few days. You cannot predict because, some videos climb dramatically high and some take their time. So I think there are people out there who are fighting off the trolls, and those people are actually the ones that we have to encourage to actually come out and say, that whether you like something or not. Because if the expression can only be done by people who are negative, then everything is going to be labeled negative.
Yeah.
And I agree, it's a problem, and we have to try and encourage those people who are positive to say what they think.
Yeah, but positive people often get, just because of the deluge of negativity, they sort of withdraw. And then the domination is by these voices. Alka, art is something that's attacked so much, so often. Do you have a view on this?
I just finished that. I think for me, it's like paparazzi. Everybody wants a scandal. Everybody loves reading it. And then they dismiss it. It's like the Daily. So people become wiser, even with trolling. People become wiser. You read it and then you say, this is it. It happens to, I think, everybody. And everybody, like, we had a part of it with our Delhi Photo Festival. Somebody just went on a real vicious campaign. And we just let it be. And after some time, it just passed out. So I think what is good will always stay. And as far as art goes, let me tell you, it's easier to engage and sell art which is more commercial. As art which is creativity for the sake of creativity, it takes time, it takes people to kind of understand that. And I'm coming to technologies for people. But
creative art is also commercial, no? You don't want to sell a painting that you've made. It's your expression,
See, it
but
depends.
you would like to
It depends. When people are working with new media technologies, how much of it is sellable?
That's an interesting point because I wanted to come to that. Do finish what you were saying and then we can take this up, which is that culture is all very well, but you have to make a living also.
Sure.
So can the internet help artists to actually make commercial,
livelihood.
Yeah, livelihood.
I'll finish after.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that there's always somebody who's supporting. There's I'm going to talk in this new age language now. You leave it out to the universe and there's somebody supporting. Really. Yeah, there is. Because you see, there are so many things. Now you've got new media labs, you've got laboratories, you've got people in Amsterdam doing things. You had the Rights Academy where people were coming out with technology and you wonder who the hell is ever going to buy a film. So there are museums, there are patrons, and there are, like for example, augmented reality, who's going to look at that? But there are corporates who are looking at it. There are culture labs who are supporting people who are at the edge of technology, because artists are the people who are really taking technology to another level. Google is setting up something, fine. But who's going to take it to the next level? It's going to be artists like Suni, it's going to be maybe Rashid Rana who's doing something, maybe like Pascal who's working seamlessly. And we had a photographer who was actually a sculptor, but he's working seamlessly between photography, drawing and painting. So, it's artists who take technology to absolutely another level, and they are required, and they will find somebody supporting them. They may not become Damien Hirst, They will not get millions for doing a diamond encrusted skull. But those are the true thinkers, you know. And if you always notice, the true thinkers and the true innovators never got their due in their lives. Of course, now with America giving patents and things, it's changed a lot. But you look at the old people, the Cambridge professors, they hardly had even an electric blanket to cover themselves, but they were the ones who drove invention to another level. And in the same way, I think the real thinkers and innovators who learn to think differently, they are aware of that and they're not going to give up. I mean, sure, I'm a romantic and an idealist, but there are lots of people like that. And you know, there is somewhere along the line a seamless kind of blending and, you know, the rivers confluence somewhere and it goes into the sea somewhere.
You were saying about making money by...
I will, but I think she wants...
Do
you want to add
would you like to
something,
say
Sonia?
something?
Or are you trying to get the word in?
Making money through the net.
Yes.
No, because it's a practical
Okay,
thing. I mean, if I'm a
see,
photographer,
I'll tell you
I want to,
something
of course,
in
live.
my personal experience, how the net has really helped me. Before Facebook, there was no way that an independent artist could promote their own work without an ad agency or a PR agency. And now you can. For me, that's a huge, huge thing. The second thing is that in the old days, you needed a publishing company's art department to make a book. With the onset of digital technology and desktop publishing, I self-published my book with my friend Aurobind Patel, the designer, and myself. There were two people, and we published our book. All those things are due to technology. You know, and I'm not making a distinction here between digital and internet. To me, both are kind of aligned. So in those two respects in my own life, that's how it's helped. And of course, websites. You have a website. You can promote your own work through a website. So.
And I think, from my point of view, we have very clear evidence about how internet is helping artists actually, monetize. There's two parts, right? One is the promotional aspect, which you mentioned, which is critical. Social media, websites, YouTube, whatever you. But direct monetization is actually happening a lot more. It might be happening much, much more in the West at the moment. I'm sure it's going to start happening here as well. I don't have Indian examples, but I can tell you, for example, a lot of the music videos that go up now on YouTube are actually being monetized directly. So there's actually cash payments being sent to artists from YouTube based on advertising revenues that come in. So Gangnam Style's entire kind of initial revenue stream.
So how does that work?
Well, it's a revenue share model. So for example, you put up a video, it's really popular, someone places an ad on it, you can opt in saying that, yes, I would like advertisements on my video, and then Google will send you, YouTube will send you a revenue share of that ad. So this is how a lot of artists currently are actually sustaining themselves. And the other example, which is my favorite, is Kickstarter. A lot of the patrons, usually patrons have been corporates. Patrons have been, rich people of society. But now the patrons are all of us. I mean, and Kickstarter crowdfunding, which is the clear example of that. If you go on Kickstarter right now, there are at least 20 to 30 art projects of artists that are currently getting individual dollar contributions to make it a success. So that's happening purely on crowd. Someone's deciding to give $10, $20, $30.
Right. I think it would be nice to take some questions from the audience, if anyone has any questions. No? Yes, sure. I don't think you... there, you get a mic. If you could just introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I am Amit Pasricha, and thank you so much for a very lovely discussion. My question is to the man from the internet. And
oh my God, you're not going to live this down.
So we heard very wonderful things about the internet here, and as Suni very rightly pointed out, it's a wonderful thing, and there's also the other side about the internet. So I'll just try to bring this into perspective. Of course, internet and Google is doing such great things relating with culture, with art, with books. And I'll just borrow a few things from Chris Pinney's lecture yesterday. He said, he spoke about the utopian promise. So similarly, internet also is in our lives with a certain utopian promise, as you mentioned in your museum project. But there's also a dystopian response that is also coming from within the internet, within the Google. And I would like to point out your book project, the book scanning project by Google, which is the most ambitious project that Google has ever imagined, and it's going on. But this is also one project which has received a lot of flack because there has been gross copyright violations. People have not, as you mentioned, when you share a video on internet, and there's this revenue sharing with the authors, but similarly the same thing is not happening with people who are the creators, who are the authors of these books. And there's a lawsuit in the United States, and Google is fighting that. So I just want to know that how Google as a company is reconciling with all of this, because it's a dystopian response that is coming from within you, and also what is happening in the Google book scanning project here in India. So, and on what stage is that here? Thank you so much.
That's a lot of questions, but let me try and zoom out a little bit. So Google Books is a completely different project from the Google Cultural Institute, and it's important to distinguish the two because Google Books is actually a official kind of like, this is also official, but it's more like a product. It's like Android, right? Whereas the Google Cultural Institute is more of a platform that's actually set up as a non-profit. Google Books is not set up as a non-profit. It's set up as a as a product, and I think that's one of the key learnings we've taken with the Google Cultural Institute, right? We could have done maybe a similar approach with art and with the photography stuff that we're doing. But we learned that maybe it's better to work with museums, right? So we're actually working with museums. So let's say NGMA, which is NGMA is one of our partners, they've provided, a certain collection of works. They legally have confirmed that they've cleared copyright for them, right? So the responsibility of clearing the copyright, responsibility of managing the copyright, responsibility of these things are now with the institutions that know how to do it rather than Google. So that's one thing. Second thing, I think Google Books project, as you said, it's a very ambitious project. And in anything very ambitious, there will be ups and downs. You could meet a lot of academics and students who say that the Google Books project has changed their life, right? Because access to that level of academic research has been impossible. You then meet the other side, which says maybe it's not. So in India specifically, I'm seeing if Fatima is around, but she has disappeared. She was. I think she ran away because she didn't want to answer your question, but no, I'm kidding. I'll call her later. But I'm not based in India. I'm actually from the London office. So I don't know where Google Books is in India, but Fatima will be very happy to explain to you what are the problems, what are the opportunities. I think personally, it's a learning experience for all of us. I think wherever possible, we have to work with the copyright holders, and we're trying to do that right now. Even with the book settlement that we're doing, we're actually working with the copyright holders right now.
Yes, sir.
I view the internet as an empowering tool, and I certainly believe that these museums can put up their stuff online themselves. As with the Delhi Photo Festival, they must be having a website of their own. So when we talk about you aggregating everything into Google Cultural Institute, there is a vague parallel with what Saatchi had done, some kind of an art gallery online. So what do you see happening to this into the longer term?
Sure. Great question, actually. One thing about the Saatchi thing, that's again for profit. So I just like to distinguish this because this was a big decision for Google to take to make this a non-profit. The main thing I think which we should say is we actually are very, very open, and I've said this when we launched first time, is that we didn't need to do this. Museums should have done this themselves, but they didn't. They will, but our view to them was that we can continue to wait for unauthoritative images popping around on the internet. Or you could come on, like for example, take Starry Night. The reason MoMA got convinced that MoMA has a fantastic website, by the way, one of the best websites. But they did not have the Starry Night in extreme high resolution protected and served to you instantaneously without downloading any software. So the thing for them was not to replace their website, but to supplement it. So I don't know how much time you spent on the Google Art project, but what we do is actually very different from a website. We have only 3 main features. You zoom into extreme details of paintings. We don't offer like a standard website format because that's kind of what museums are doing. We are offering immersive experiences of art. And I wish I could show it to you because when I show it, actually it kind of, stops the discussion. The second is we took virtual tours inside the museums, which museums are not doing on their websites. And we're actually giving these tours back to the museums to put on their websites.
So how popular is this? Just as a...
Well, we have, I think we've crossed over 15 to 16 million visitors coming in. We've got, 44 countries on the roadmap. We have launched and around 250 museums already there. All the big galleries, Uffizi, Orsay, all of them are there. And they all are doing it not to replicate their websites, They're doing it because the one thing that was missing, apart from the Zoom and virtual tour, and another feature is user galleries where people like you could make your own collection. Forget all of that. There was a simple thing missing, which was there was not one single destination on the web where you could go and look at all the Vermeers in the world. You would have to go to 20 different websites, see unauthoritative sources, and so a lot of them joined because it's a collaborative platform, which has not happened in this sector ever. So you could compare, for example, a Tayyab Mehta with a Van Gogh, and then put a Bruegel next to it. That you can't do anywhere else on the web.
I think that gentleman had a question.
I heard you, I came in just now, 2 minutes back, and I heard you that you're taking copyright from the galleries. Now, as a photographers, galleries are just a place to show, they don't have a copyright.
So just to be very clear, we don't partner with any gallery. We only partner with non-profit foundations and museums, and they have to take responsibilities. For example, MoMA has gone out and secured copyright from artist rights holders. So for example, if there's anything that we get and anyone has a dispute about, we put them in touch with the gallery or the foundation, as you said, and they can remove it. So for example, if you see anything on Delhi Photo Festival,
No,
right?
Suni, you're showing at NGMA, will they have their copyright to pass it on?
They haven't given us any of Suni's works because they don't have the copyright, and I'm actually talking to Suni about that.
That's what I'm saying. They'll need to get in touch with an artist.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we have nothing from Suni, and that's the reason, because they need to talk to Suni first.
Before we take any more questions, one thing I wanted to ask Suni, since this copyright thing came up, you know, it's very difficult to control the spread of an image on the web, because suppose, for instance, we use an image of yours in our magazine, and it's put up on the internet. Even if we try and make it not downloadable, somehow people can just pick it up and then it's all over. Then you don't have any control over what has happened to that image any longer. So when we deal with photographers, we constantly face this problem. Please put a watermark, we will, you know. So how do you cope with this fact that, you know, it's very difficult to control where your image is once it's out there?
I think you would go crazy if you tried to control it. There is no control, and you have to let go after a certain point. You have to take certain cautions, which is why in terms of photography and the Google Cultural Project, you know, one way to protect yourself as a photographer is not to put very high-res images on the web. And since Google Cultural Project needs very high-res images, that's a factor to consider. So that's one way of protecting yourself. But as a photographer, what is objectionable is that if your image gets into the data bank of, say, Hindustan Brunch, and then somebody uses it again and again and again in the paper because they have it in their data bank,
see,
that's the problem.
Yeah, but here's where technology happens, because when you print a magazine, I mean, you make a magazine, all the photographs, without anything, just automatically go into the library, you know. So that's the technology. Then we have to go and say, no, don't take this picture. And
no,
so
but how do newspapers are brought to it? Because they are very careful about, you know, if it's one-time use.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Sorry, any other questions? I just wanted this copyright thing.
Hi.
Yeah.
Like Tolstoy always mentioned that there's good art and bad art, and art is something that absolutely consumes you. So the first question is to any of you, with internet, do we still have the concept of, you know, good art or bad art, or everything is an art? And the second question is with something like Google Art Project. I've been there and I've seen Starry Nights, and the color, the cypress, everything is beautiful. So what are the different ways that we can aesthetically engage with art over internet with such projects?
Ladies first.
Okay, I'll answer about good art and bad art. Okay, what we were discussing outside, and what Samar Jodha was saying is that what the internet has done is it's taken out the gatekeepers, right? So there are no gatekeepers. And so I think it's putting you as the viewer in that responsible position of judging whether something is good or bad. And it's taken out that editor who is the gatekeeper who will say whether your book will get published or not. Or that, you know, now everyone's a reviewer. And so you are in that position. And I think it's fantastic. Me personally, I think and have always thought that art is very subjective. And there are very few, to me, objective criteria for judging art. So it takes you back into that subjective area where you are in the driver's seat in terms of making an opinion.
We're not a gatekeeper. In what sense?
Well, you get to choose what goes on.
No, we don't. The museum chooses. We don't choose anything. We have
The museum.
Yes, exactly.
No, so you get to choose the museum.
But only on this one website in the world,
Right.
right? But on YouTube, there's no gatekeeper. So we're talking about the internet. On this website, unfortunately, I'll tell you why. If I started choosing stuff to put on this website, I don't think we'll get any viewers. So I have to trust the curators at the museums who know their job better, right? So when I go
But
to
then
MoMA
which
and I tell
museums?
MoMa, that's
Again, which museums? It's inevitable, it's inescapable that it will be exclusive. It is inevitable.
this project, I 100% agree
Yeah.
with you, but this is one website on the net, right? But there's many other websites like YouTube where there is nobody blocking you. You can just go put up anything.
I think, you know, the internet is really like a virtual showcase, and people are magpies, they choose what they want. So it's there for everybody. It's actually an information space, and it's really democratic, because today, if you're not part of an elite club, if it's being done that, you set up your own blog.
Yeah.
And you do whatever you want. So the internet actually, frankly, is the most democratic space, and it's up to you how you want to use technology. And it's up to you how much time you want to spend with that technology. I know people who blog themselves to death, and some of them are becoming published authors.
Yeah, sure. But I think she wanted to know how to aesthetically engage with art on the net. So is that, as Suni said, just subjective, or is there anything else you could do?
Well, having studied formally art for so many years, maybe I'm a bit of a purist. It's like stocks and shares. There are people dabbling in stocks and shares, and there are people who have an inside knowledge and look at bulls and bears. So if you really want to even engage with the internet, it's important. You can use the internet itself to educate yourself, because everything is available. And there are certain, sacred rules and sacred things that when you look at a painting, you have to look at line, form, color. But if you're looking at postmodern, post-conceptual art, then you're looking at the fluxus, or you're looking at postmodernity, then you have to know how do you get there? What was Dadaism, and how do you get on there? So all that is also available on the net. As I said, it's actually a virtual moving feast, and you decide what suits your digestion.
So this was your question, right? So I'm just showing it.
Amit, can I ask you a question? How do you control color, which is so important in paintings? Because as a photographer, I know that, if I'm printing something, then my monitor has to be calibrated with the printer's monitor. So when you are showing in a million different households the same painting, how do you ensure that everyone sees the same colors?
So that's behind you right now, Starry Night, and you can see the color is going to be different on the projector and on the laptop. And that's something, unfortunately, we can't control because, that's just display resolution issues. But the image is actually done by the institution. So there is some kind of, quality check that they do before, well, the image is gone now, but it's come back.
It'll come back. I just wanted to show what the difference really is.
On the aesthetic point, I think the more you can create, so when we launched this whole Zoom thing, right, it was very divided. Some people thought it was gimmickry. Whereas some of the academics who approached us said, we found details in Bruegel paintings that we have been studying and we haven't found for 30 years, right?
Because they could look so
quickly without download, without paying anything, there's no gatekeeper over there. It was just coming in, zooming and checking stuff out. So I think you have to find things like these to engage with the internet audience, because young people are moving so fast that you need something that's exciting for them, So I think, by the way, just so you know, that's Fatima for your Google Books India question. She's just back in the room, so she'll be the best to chat with you afterwards.
Is Samar? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, hi, thanks. No, that's brilliant. I just want to bring this back to, because this room is full of a lot of young photographers, and I come from a generation where what Dr. Pandey mentioned earlier, you didn't know what computers were and all that stuff. I just want to bring to is that getting this debate of gatekeepers and which gallery to go and which media to meet and who's going to give you a little 1 minute or whatever, it's a tough battle. It's always tough. But I think the biggest blessing taking back to photography has been this whole new media, because all of a sudden, if you're doing something sensible, it doesn't matter how much of noise is out there. If there is something which you're saying is different, you've got the social media, the Instagram, and you've got your followers. So you don't need to worry about that, which museum and gallery I'm going to go into. You'll automatically have followers, and that can also end up having sales, which is obviously you are doing, that's part of your living. So I think it's, for me, as Sony pointed out, it's no-brainer for sure, because you are really in a win-win situation today, because you don't have to go please personalities out there. You just got to do your work, and if you have it right, you're definitely a winner,
Agreed. I think Dinesh wants to say something.
Just to carry on from what Samar is saying and just bring it back to the festival for a moment, it's been our experience that the reason I think we've been able to have a festival like this, and for instance, we met Amit, barely 6-7 months ago,
yeah,
and we have a festival, all right? Alka knows the back scenes of how we put this together. Interestingly, in the first edition of the festival, we had about 600 submissions. This time around, we've got almost 2,500. So by the virtue of being on the net, the sheer reach, and if I may say so, the popularity of the festival has gone up exponentially. The danger of that, to my mind, and this is something which I would want to discuss and think about in the coming future, is that one also tends to think that now the world knows. Which is something which is not necessarily true. Just because you have a website up, or you're on Facebook, and you're on Google Plus, and you're mailing to a few hundred people, it definitely does not mean that the world knows. So that is something which if you would want to discuss and think about. And even in the earlier times when film was analog, Suni is absolutely right, and you had to make a print and share it to someone who was probably a friend. Today also, just because you put up a website, and this happens to me a lot of times, that young photographers come and say, I've made a website, but I'm not getting any work, now what should I do? So I just tell them that, look, making a website is just like printing a brochure.
Yeah.
If you're going to keep the brochure in your cupboard, at home, or in your studio, I'm sorry, no one's going to see it. So just having a website is not a guarantee for getting business. Being on the net is not a guarantee for getting business. You have to work to get the attention. So forget about the noise, forget about everything else, just find ways to get the attention. So it's still very much old world as far as that is concerned.
I said you still need newspapers.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Samar and Dinesh, since they are like really the top of the line photographers. So do you feel that, photographs taken with phones and things like, are like not quite up there? You need to have a really good camera, and a phone picture is just a phone picture. Is there that arrogance of it at any level?
I think Samar and I are the wrong photographers to ask this, because we are both avid phone photographers.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. I mean, you have some, super sexy camera.
So don't think that we've got grey hair. We are still analog types.
But I just thought, photographers love all their like super fancy cameras with fabulous lenses.
Yes, everybody loves the circus, of course. When you go for a commercial photography, when I came in 20 years back in this market, I used to go with one little camera and one little flash, and the agency guys used to tell me that, you can't do this because the client thinks that so much of money being paid and you come with a small camera bag. So, so I would arrive with 20 suitcases, we still use one camera, but they were paying a lot more money. So yeah, they need circus, of course, But going on a serious note, and, Dinesh is very much, we've spoken about this, over a period of time. I think the best thing about this noise, what we call in photography, what was pointed out the other day at the talk, that more photography has been done in 2012 than last 150 years of photography, which is quite amazing. I think the best part is that all of a sudden the education, photography was always considered as either you're a professional or a rich or a serious amateur, and nobody else could touch that business, and that has really been the biggest wall which has come down, because all of a sudden everybody's a photographer, and if you have a slightly different tune in that noise, people are gonna come and look at you, and social media helps, and you don't need to go to, as I said earlier, to your conventional showcases, whether it's media, gallery, or whatever. So I think overall, all of a sudden we have lifted, I don't know out of poverty or not, but we've definitely lifted people up into the photography scene. And I think that's the best thing about technology, because it doesn't matter. I mean, I shoot 50, 70% of my photography is on my phone now, and it doesn't matter, you know, how much of big drama I create otherwise.
No, at the end of the day, the old world things of talent, hard work, and uniqueness and creativity, still rule. You can't get away from that. The internet is really a platform, which the newspaper is and was. As much as the Google Art project is, it's a space. It's a space to allow you to share your work. Yes, of course, it's exclusive, and why shouldn't it be? Because if you are very good, then you get to be on it. If you're not, then you don't get to be on it. So it's just really the same old world. It's just being delivered in different ways. I would just want to intervene for a moment. We've got Mr. Parvez Diwan, the Secretary of Ministry of Tourism, here with us. And if I may just invite him up to say a few words to us, and if you would like to, I would hope you would want to continue the discussion post that. It'd be great.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I've stopped using paper ever since I got this. No, I've stopped using it much before. Mr. Amit Sood, Ms. Alka Pandey, Ms. Sunita Raporwala, Ms. Poonam Saxena, Mr. Dinesh Khanna, ladies and gentlemen. I really don't know why I have been invited here, but I have been, and I never say no to Google, because perhaps because I assume it's in my official capacity, not in my personal capacity. I pretend to be a bit of an author, and I've got an Indian Wikipedia coming up called Indpedia with an A, the British way, the Indpedia. But I think really because Google and our ministry have been working on a very ambitious, very exciting project to get photographs of all aspects of Incredible India together. And all our ministry is doing is we're giving 6 prizes, fairly comprehensive prizes, to the best photography. But since it's a fairly good discussion, animated discussion, maybe I should wear my other hat and get into the discussion. So we were discussing today about democratization of art, and a lady from there mentioned Tolstoy. Now, you've always had art at different levels. You've had popular art, which a lot of us look down on because it's too popular, it's too bimbet, too bimbo. There's been highbrow art, which others, people who are from the popular art, they criticize as being pseudo-intellectual, being out of their reach, being pretentious. And of course, there's middlebrow art. And I don't see why the internet should change all that. It just reinforces it. It just gives popular art a better platform, it gives middlebrow art a platform, and it gives highbrow art a very good platform too. As Madam said, she has been in art all her life, and she favors high art, and so do I, but and good art has very, very serious platforms on the internet. Democratization doesn't mean dumbing down. Internet is merely the medium of dissemination. It doesn't change art, though of course it makes it more exciting. I don't know if any of you have noticed the kind of art budget hotels around the world are using. The big hotels of course use, the expensive hotels use very expensive art, antique art, Renaissance art, the Dutch masters. But a very interesting thing is happening in the budget hotels of the world. It's almost become de rigueur for the better budget hotels of the world to have a kind of art. I don't know what it's called. Maybe some of you can tell me what it's called. It doesn't have a frame. The canvas goes around the sides and the image continues into the sides. So does it have a name? I don't know. I've been noticing a lot of it in the last 2 years, that the canvas goes around the frame. Sorry, it doesn't have a frame around it. So the wooden, that square thing, rectangular thing that you have, it goes around it. And the canvas normally would be white on the sides and on top and bottom. Not in this new budget hotel art. And a lot of it has to do with digitization. There's this brilliant series that is being shown in Bucharest. It takes freeze frames from television. The television weather report. So tomorrow in Dhaka, there will be rain. And you know, normally the television screen has some images of rain, and it has 39 degrees highest, 22 degrees lowest. So there are people playing with this, digitizing this. Of course, this is not the internet so much as the digital revolution that's doing this. And as far as phones being better or worse than the old SLRs, I belong to a generation when if you're an audiophile, your audio system, mine certainly spreads over 0.5 kilometer and has got huge speakers. But the audio systems of 20 years, 30 years ago, small audio systems that big today have the same frequency response, the same watt output, the same peak music output, PMS. I know it's got a funny meaning too. Peak music output. It has the same. Similarly for cameras. Today, with a good cell phone, a good smartphone, you're getting the same kind of resolution that old SLRs used to. The kind of richness of colors you're getting, the ability to shoot in low light conditions that you're getting with these smartphones is as good, if not better, than some of the f1 by 2.2 or 2.3. I won't get into f1.7. Those were the snob jobs, 1.4. But anything beyond 2, f1 by 2, the smartphones of today are doing better than that. So there's a huge amount of democratization thanks to the internet. And there's enough popular art for, as I said, middlebrow, popular and highbrow art. A very interesting thing that I was discussing with some officers of Google. It's an issue now. If any of you ever bothers to read the comment section of any article, it's unbelievable the amount of vitriol, the amount of hatred that's going around the internet. I don't know if any of you have done that. I do that on a certain newspaper. I believe that newspaper promotes that kind of vitriol. It's one religion against another. You click an article and then go into the comment section, and that newspaper rewards people for spewing venom, religion versus religion, sect versus sect, caste versus caste, and recently Pune versus Bangalore. I thought this was unique to India and that particular newspaper till I read a study in the New York Times only last week. This is quite common in the USA too. Maybe it's the anonymity that the internet gives you. Even though you have a name, your IP address can be traced. You give yourself a fake name, and that gives you a fake cover for spewing all kinds of venom. And if any of you has gone through the comment section, you'll know exactly what I mean. But in the long run, I see hope. Wikipedia is the best example. In Wikipedia, you have two broad kinds of subjects, the very popular ones and the ones which are not accessed very often. The popular ones, even if they deal with religion and politics or both, and they excite a lot of emotions, Nazis, the Holocaust, 9/11. So each party tries to ram its point of view on Wikipedia today. By not tomorrow, maybe within 3 or 4 hours, if it's a popularly watched page, the other point of view cancels out your venom. And actually, if you take the most contentious topics on Wikipedia, you'll realize that the mutual mudslinging, the mutual vitriol balances itself out. And what emerges is, as they say, you have what, an action, a reaction, thesis, antithesis, then finally you have a synthesis. And that, I believe, is where the internet is going to take us in the long run. You'll have your thesis, your antithesis, but the synthesis, I believe, will prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dewan. May I request the panel to just continue for a few more minutes, so I think we can kind of wrap up what we've been talking about. Yeah?
Sure, we can do that. So, any other questions before we go back perhaps to the panelists? Anybody wants to ask anything else?
So, thank you so much for this discussion actually. So, this brings about a lot of questions in my head. I'm going to put that up to the man from the internet first. So, the thing is,
Oh dear.
we have been talking about synthesis and artists coming up, galleries coming up. So how important do you think is the absence of critiques? As in, we are seeing the day-to-day people who are commenting, who are liking a picture or something like that. But don't you think that you should bring about, I mean, a change wherein the critics and real panels come on the website, probably your website, or you probably create a section wherein not only galleries, but probably real artists come up and they get really criticized. As in, Delhi Photo Festival will help us, like there is a critique section for the amateurs tomorrow, and there was a critique section for the professionals yesterday. So how about bringing that online and bringing about a serious change in terms of, I mean, why does an artist have to wait for, I mean, it could be demotivating for an artist. He puts up a good picture and some random people comment on his picture, and the real critics just stay behind, probably because they have not come up to, this technology or something like that. So is there anything happening in the future regarding that, or?
Sure. So I think, first of all, let's distinguish two things which I think is creating a little bit of confusion. The Google Art Project is not the internet, and the Google Cultural Institute is not the internet. We have to talk make it very clear, right? They're two different things. So on this project, right, to be super clear, so it doesn't come up again. This exhibition that Dinesh and his team have done, they have provided this kind of an exhibition layout, which I recommend just looking with some metadata that could be coming from a critic. I don't know. We don't ask that question. They just select what they want to get. So you keep going. So it's essentially a digital exhibition that you're enjoying. So all the works that you see here have come from, you could say, critics, right? But I just want to bring up the other gentleman's point where he spoke about gatekeepers, right? So that's you could say, the contradiction of what different people want, right? There is a demand for no gatekeepers, no critics, anybody to be able to put up their things, which I think is really good, which is YouTube acts as a great platform for something like that. Then you have other platforms like this, which is being managed by curators, right? Then you have social networks, where, to be honest, last few months in Europe, a lot of the curators in large museums, whether it's Tate, Pompidou, Getty, they have actually taken to social networks to talk about Pinterest, for example. Getty's doing a project. Getty's lead curator in LA, is doing a project on Pinterest to provide critical evaluation of photographs using Pinterest, right? So I think they're coming, but I think there are some of the curators. I think there's a generational gap, right? I can't lie about this. It's just there, right? And so they don't know if that's the right medium for them to be using to make. I mean, you should ask Alka, right? She's a critic, so it would be a great question to pose to her. But from my point of view, it's changing.
I actually want to just bring Suni in on this, because we've been talking about art a lot, but culture also includes other things. And Suni, as you're probably aware, he has been the screenwriter for films like Salam Bombay and Namesake, etc. So as somebody who has collaborated on film projects of this nature, which are global in their appeal and the center of a lot of attention, what do you feel? Is it important to have film critics who have been, who are knowledgeable, let's say, and have been doing the job for a long time and can put films in a context? Or does it not matter, and you can just have people from, just ordinary people commenting on the film or on your work or on your script, etc.?
I think both is important, because as someone who works in the creative media, there are critics that I respect, and I will always go to them to see what they say about a film or a book. And so you make your own filters. And I also find popular opinion valuable, because as a filmmaker, it is a mass medium, and I am wanting to reach as many people as possible, and they are my audience. And so I think you can intelligently use this feedback the way you want to. It's there for you to choose how to do it.
So you'd like both points of view?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alka, do you agree with that? That you would need probably professional critics as well as just ordinary people posting their views?
I think it always helps, because the gap between what we called earlier high art and low art is going. There is this whole thing of, in fact, that debate has already begun. There was a very interesting article in The Guardian a couple of months ago where they were saying that, writing for art itself has become an activity, and many critics and writers deliberately write in a language which the common man does not understand, because they want to overawe the reader and frighten the reader and bring a level, make that aura for themselves. So lots of people are actually wanting mediators, and I think the internet is one of the greatest mediators, because you have access. It's like, I do use Wikipedia, but I never use it for my academic writing at all, because it's an information thing. If I want to know what is happening or who's the person who did that, I will definitely go to Wikipedia, but I will not use it as a reference tool for my research. But it's an information tool, so it's really important to have a use of both, because if you want to go into something special, then you either buy the book or you get into the gate of, where you are paying to get into reading Google Books. So everything today is available at the press of a button. I think that's very important.
Can I just ask a question based on what he asked? But would you be comfortable in a tweet, in 6 words, to criticize something as a critic?
It's a generational thing. Believe you me, it's really generational, because I see a lot of people tweeting away. And I come from a generation where we read a lot. I still like to write postcards and notes and letters. And I really do dislike the internet language where you're calling a driver DRV. I'm also forced to say LMK for let me know because of shortage of space. It's LMK. And, it's now I think of my father when I started using. Yeah.
But that's really good, because, but philosophically...
LMK is not good.
No, what I meant is, the fact that I kind of, in a way, I kind of agree with you that, some things everything should not be condensed, right?
Yeah, because the spellings will go. It's like my father, when I used to say CP, old order, Connaught Place Name. What is this CP? Now I understand LMK, DRV, BTW. I mean, we are losing touch with the language. So,
if I may just add to that, what if you were still speaking Shakespearean English or speaking Doordarshan Hindi right now? So that is, I think, part of the evolution. Yeah. I've learned this from my daughters. I've had to, so that I could keep communicating with them.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I'm not going to get into this because I'm a grammar Nazi. But anyway, please tell us.
Okay, I have a question which is on a flip side. I read recently somewhere that there's an app that has been started on mandirs. And people who can't visit mandirs, or when there are long queues, are sort of now can download this app and they'll get darshan directly from this app. Now, what I'm sort of trying to get to is that I imagine seeing the idea of a Mona Lisa or Starry Nights coming alive in front of my screen is awesome. But do you think it's discouraging me from actually paying or imagining that one day I'll be able to go to Paris, or one day I'll be able to see the gallery in real life? Do you think there is something like that that's happening? Do you think that it might discourage me from going altogether and just sort of...
Only you know the answer to that.
May I answer that?
Yeah. I can't tell you yes or no. I can just provide data because I work for Google.
To answer
okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, the analogy is that when photography started, and before that you physically traveled to see the Eiffel Tower, you physically traveled to see some place by ship. Then photography happened, right? And when photography happened, your question, the analogy would be, would that stop people from going to those places? Because now you can see a photograph. Well, it's the same thing. It's in that technology progresses, and every step has actually the same questions. If you think about it. If you think about how the photograph, bringing it back to the Delhi Photo Festival, bridge distances. It's the same way that the internet is bridging physical distances with virtual realities. And the photograph was the first virtual reality we had.
I mean, I'll go back to the previous festival where I sometimes missed out on a few talks, and I actually just logged on and saw all that online itself, the previous videos and all that. So, I mean, I get that aspect. But I would want to be able to, I mean, I'm sort of, even though I'm coming from an era where I'm pro-internet, I myself exist on the internet, but I also feel that there is a sort of a disconnect that might also exist. I mean, people who are religious are now choosing to just see do their darshan of their gods online.
A lot of it is because they are not physically present.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can be in North America and do a darshan of Ganesh. And see, you choose to do it. No one's forcing you to, right? So if you choose to do it, you choose to do it. If you don't get the app.
Would you think that the temple was the first virtual reality anyway? Or the God is the statue there?
Sort of brought, I was treating art as God.
God is the supreme being and is not really in that piece of stone. So whether you see it on an app or whether you went to the temple and saw your God,
but
or the representation of the God, how does it really matter at the end of the day? And just to add to what Suni is saying, I would think considering the amount of traffic you do see at the temples or at the Eiffel Tower or at the Taj Mahal, it has grown exponentially because people are able to see it through a photograph or through the internet and therefore want to come and see that. I think and technology anyway, I don't know about making people lazier, it's certainly supposed to facilitate people's lives and make it easier. Now easier is lazier or the other way around is something for the individual to really decide upon.
But Dinesh, I think he's making a point which is not only about temples and darshan, because I notice, a lot of colleagues of mine who are much younger, what is happening is that you are meeting people less than you were, you are phoning people less than you were, you are texting people more than you're phoning people, and you are phoning people more than you're meeting people. And soon you may not even be texting people, maybe you're just on a WhatsApp with a lot of people. Maybe you don't often you don't want people to come home because you're dying to go and update your Facebook. So I think while you're in communication with a lot of people, there is a certain creeping loneliness. I think it's not a bad, I think what the point he's trying to make is not only about darshan in the temple, but while you're reaching out to more and more and more people, you're more and more in touch with the world, somewhere you're shrinking also within yourself. That's not it's been discussed a lot.
A similar thing on a smaller scale happened when the telephone first came around.
Sure.
And like Amit rightly said that, with technology...
No, I'm not saying we have to reverse it. I'm just saying it's something that's happening.
No, what I was going to say is that these are things which are happening. They actually at the individual level, you really can't fight except to say, I will not be part of it. Or I will be a part of it to this extent. That's a choice which will always remain with the individual. In the point you're making about people texting, etc. I mean, I remember talking to my daughter, that there were 4 of them sitting on one sofa in my house, all right? Texting. And they were texting. So I said, hey, listen, you 4 are here together, why aren't you talking to each other? They said, we are. I said, but then why don't you talk to each other? They said, because we're also talking to 10 other people who are not here. So that's your world.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, quickly I'm just going to say something. I was at a Google conference where I think Google Glass was being launched here in Delhi. And this was being quoted by somebody from Google who was talking about how he was referring to photographs. 20 years back, somebody said that film won't exist, shooting on film won't happen again. Everybody laughed at that. Today, film has become very rare. Everybody's moved to digital. Today, he says that I can sort of state that books 20 years from now will be rare. Everybody today will laugh because everybody's coming from this phase where it's sort of there's Kindle existing, there is e-books existing. So I'm also coming to the point that museums and just sort of this sort of process that is happening, do you think that something like that is going to happen? That's what I'm sort of trying to revolve around.
Okay, I think you won't let me go until I answer. I hope the ladies will have sorted this one out. But okay, Raman behind from Google will clarify if anyone from Google said anything or Google Glass, but I'll stick to the museum stuff because that's what I know. So when we launched this project, every single journalist from Roberta Smith at the New York Times to the guys in The Guardian, everyone wrote, are we going to lose the physical experience of visiting a museum? So you brought up a very good point. However, in the last 2 years, the data, which is what I said before, because you can only look at data at the end of the day for these kind of subjective things. Museums are recording their highest ever visitor figures right now. Right now, the top museum destination in the world, guess what it is? Brazil, in terms of growth. Why? People never used to go to Brazil to view art, right? But people are seeing what Brazilian art and culture has to offer, and Brazil is coming on top. Obviously, the Louvres and the Orsay's are staying consistent as top museums, but you can see the growth is actually in the emerging markets. People are traveling around. I don't think you can ever experience art, in my opinion, purely online. Online is just going to supplement the experience. That's it.
I think we kind of said that before, because what is, even for the Delhi Photo Festival, you can watch it online, but people are actually traveling. We've had a bigger footfall this year than last time. So this internet is just an added accessory. Yeah. It's just like Wikipedia, which provides you information. It's a tool. But the experience, that's a rare privilege, and everybody is traveling more. As you rightly said, going more to museums. Publishers are thriving. Why are there more books being published than ever before? We've got more publishers coming into India. Simon Schuster are here. Everybody's here in the market that it is. So the experience, the actual experience, even for darshans, that is for the aging population. The world is growing older because of scientific medical advancement. So all those old people, they can't walk, so they will go. And the minute a person has money or time, they will go to Bodh Gaya to do their Pinddan if they can afford to. Afford doesn't only mean money, it means time, space, energy. So these are alternatives.
Very quick comment if you permit. See, taking from, am I visible? Am I audible? Hello?
I can hear you.
It's working.
Hello. So, just picking up from there, I believe that it's a great service which Google has done, because I would like to share the experience of going to Louvre and trying to look at Mona Lisa. You cannot stand there for a second, you are pushed out. Yes. Or you go to a temple, you go to Tirupati. Yes. You are lucky if you can stand there for a second. So if you are sitting in your puja room and then watching the deity, you are much more spiritual than you go to the temple. You can go for tourism purposes. The Secretary Tourism has left, but you can still give him money by going to that place. But watching Mona Lisa on the Google Art to me seems to be much more meaningful, or Starry Night. Because in the Louvre, I can assure you, if you have gone, I've gone at least a dozen times because I love that museum, you will be pushed out of Mona Lisa. And I'm doubtful whether it is a real Mona Lisa or a fake, because people are, I'm doubtful. I'm fairly doubtful whether it is a real or a fake, because everybody is clicking it and everybody is flashing on that picture. Perhaps if it would have been a real one, it would have been destroyed. So that is a comment. Now, there is a very quick question on digitization and digital technology. And I think I wanted to ask you that question. See, there is also one thing which digital technology has brought in, and which is that the element of the skill of a photographer has gone. Because one has to now judge a picture on the basis of the skill of a photographer or on the basis of the editing which is done later on. That is one. And the other is, how do you distinguish between the real and the fake? Because you can do anything to the digital data later on.
May I put in a bit of a response to the gentleman here? I do believe that what is emerging is that technology is now moving so fast that the physical world is becoming too clunky. And this is coming down. We are now in a position that humankind is on the verge of taking a handle on its own future evolution. And when we speak of that, this whole physical world, it's too clunky, it is too slow. The process of evolution of humankind takes a generation per step. And so I do believe that, visiting places virtually is only the tip of the iceberg that we are seeing. Actually, there is an entire school of thought which I believe in, that the future of humankind is to migrate entirely into virtual space. And these things are just the beginnings of creating the environment in which we will live in the future.
I agree with you there, actually. But what I'm saying is that we are in a fortunate position where we haven't yet migrated fully into a virtual space. And so we have the best of both worlds. But I'm afraid the analog physical world is gradually going to get less and less as we find ourselves totally into a cyber world. And I think that will actually be a little unfortunate.
I really recommend, by the way, that everyone reads a short story called The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, which was written in 1909, but it is actually about what the internet could become. It's a very nice story. It's available online, so you can read it.
I'm taking credit for the internet. I love this. You know, everything online, people are looking at me. It never happens at a conference. Great.
May I request closing remarks from the panel?
Does anyone want to say anything, or should I just close? Yeah. So yeah, sure.
You should have been on the panel, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously this debate of changing of the medium from print to digital and technology. We talk about the newspapers on. I mean, the largest consumer, I think, is the print media, is newspaper. Every day, millions of newspapers come all across the world. But in Western world, it's dying, and that's what everybody sees here. But here is the opposite effect. The newspaper growth is so unreal in this part of the world. But I think the reason being is also that what we were talking earlier on the terrace was the literacy level is so different here that when you start your basic reading, you graduate to a newspaper. Whereas in the West, you start your reading on a computer itself. So the paper is actually gone. So I think it's a matter of whatever generation or how the politicians play the education in this country. There will come a time that there will be a population which will be reading on iPads, and they won't be going to the print media. And I think that would be finally the death of print. I'm sorry. And other addition I wanted to make about the darshan part of it. I think the only place is darshan thing doesn't really, works well or doesn't work is Facebook. You can have 2,500 friends, and you probably met only 20, and you're not really interested in meeting the rest. So I think that going to those temples and doing is one thing, but in real life, how many do we really meet, or how much we really want to meet?
Yeah.
So well, thank you. We have the session right here, right? And there are people, and they're talking to each other and seeing each other.
You might consider doing it just online next year.
Google Hangout.
Google Hangout, exactly.
I flew all the way from London just to be with you guys. I could have chosen the easy way out, right?
Yeah. So thank you, Suni, thank you, Alka, and thank you, Amit, and thank you, Dinesh. I think we're all agreed that the internet is a great place vis-a-vis culture, but that it has to be taken with a pinch of salt sometimes. And you actually have to go out and read and see things for yourself rather than just go online and end it at that. So thank you for being a lovely audience and great questions, and enjoy the exhibition.
Thank you.
May I also thank Fatima from Google for having set up this session.
Yes, there she is.
From millions if you choose to. And I think that's a very nice thing, for me at least. And so I'm a very avid Instagrammer.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
Amit, you talked about, this whole noise on the internet and trying to do something which can be distinguished from this noise. So that's the other problem that a lot of people feel when it comes to the internet, and when we're talking of something like culture, there's a sort of explosion of information. There's an explosion of just things coming at you. But understanding or getting knowledge or being able to really, get into something, that seems very difficult on the internet. Why is that so?
Well, our attention span is reducing, right? I mean, my colleagues, from Google here in India are, looking at their phone probably, 20 times in a conversation with me. All of us are always checking something. So we've kind of gone from this, society that, perhaps has been a little lethargic in its consumption of information to being completely, rabid, kind of we want data and we want information all the time. So how do you make sense of it? Well, you can't, to be honest. You should let it happen, because people will start filtering for themselves what they want, and controlling what a user should get is actually the worst idea. Making all the options available and then allowing the user to filter is the most important thing. So let's take Delhi Photo Festival, right? So when we met them a while back, there's been a lot of information about Delhi Photo Festival on the web. There's on Google image search, you can find small little images. But there hasn't been an authoritative, curated exhibition about the Delhi Photo Festival. So we worked with them to create these exhibitions, which are up on the screen, and you can see them later because I think the internet is a little bit weak here. But what they've done is they've taken the images and they've provided some kind of background, context, and curation around those images. So now when you're going to search Delhi Photo Festival based on, in a few months or something, this is going to pop up as a search result, right? So this is the only way to kind of fight that noise, is to actually come out there as an institution or as an artist and be authoritative. Because if you try to fight it, it's not going to work. You have to, adapt with them.
Right. Alka, as somebody who's been so deeply involved in culture and art for so many years, one of the things that people keep talking about is also that art seems for a
cultural sector, so to speak, has a great opportunity because it is a sector that can engage with the internet rather than get disrupted without having any control over it. And I think that's really what we are trying to do, which is like have conversations with cultural sector, museums, foundations, artists, and try and see how do they want to represent their works on the web? How do they want to, create space with all the noise that's there on the internet? So really carving out a space for good, high quality, authoritative cultural content is, I think, our biggest challenge right now on the web.
Suni, let's start with you, since this is the photo festival. Yeah. With the coming of the internet, everybody is a photographer today. I mean, and as a professional photographer yourself, this democratization of photography, do you think it's a good thing, or are there certain pitfalls attached to it?
Well, theoretically, it's a very good thing, and I'm totally for it. I love that everyone's a photographer and everyone has the means to be a photographer. Fortunately for me, I'm not a professional in the sense that I don't depend on photography to earn my living. I'm a screenwriter, and that's what I do to make a living. So I'm in a very fortunate space. However, if I was trying to be a professional photographer in this space, I think it would have been even more problematic perhaps than when I was doing it 20 years ago. Because as you said, everyone's a photographer, so how do you distinguish yourself? In the non-commercial space, I think in the commercial space, not everyone is a photographer. You do need training, you do need studios, you do need lights, you need to be trained, but in the sphere of documentary photography, for example, yes, everyone is a photographer.
So is it a good thing for aspiring photographers to just go on Instagram and be able to control their picture in like 30 seconds, which would probably take a photographer from earlier, hours in the dark room, getting it all right, etc.
What is really fortunate now is that you can share photographs. When I was a photographer, one of the things that I used to really long for is a way to share my work. And you could never share it unless you had photos in a photo show or you had a book. Both were very prohibitive for a photographer who was starting out. So you could share it with your friends who you were physically with. Now what Instagram has done, what Facebook has done, is that you can get feedback on your work
from reams of books to just see what you wanted. Today, 14 years down the line, internet has become part of almost the everyday, dinosaurs or no dinosaurs. We just need to flap our wings and clumsily go on to the internet because that's the only way forward. Since I've got this little chance to give a little input, I was also thinking of, when we talk of culture, we also talk of cyber culture. In visual arts, when we are saying cyber culture, what are we talking about? It's really a rhizomic way of thinking, the way we think, the post-structuralist way in visual culture. In the same way, we have to immediately think of cyber culture and think of, coming in through Korea really, because cyber culture really began with Lee Soo-man, who started the cyber culture industry by training musicians and getting them to stay in a place and then training them in different ways of singing so that they become international kind of entertainment industry called the SM entertainment industry, and all kinds of technologies then started coming in, nanotechnology, cyber technology, and culture then has actually started living in a virtual space. often as a curator, sometimes, in contemporary culture, it's become so important to really be inclusive today of the word culture, because there's high culture, there's low culture, there's popular culture, there is different, what culture are we talking of? And then, of course, celebrating the Derridian différence of culture. So sitting in New Delhi, we have to be linked with cultures of different nations. And as you see, that is happening with the Delhi Photo Festival as well. With the kind of people who are coming in, we did everything. We did all our judging through virtual space, because all the material came through virtual realities. And then you have augmented realities, and you're looking at various realities. So today, cyber culture has become really very, very challenging. And for people of my generation who have actually lived from the fax to telegrams to now having WhatsApp and Instagram. I mean, sometimes you keep wondering, where is technology going to stop, and how are you going to, keep on keeping pace with just the click of a button? So from kind of visual representation to surveillance, for all of you who were here yesterday, it was very interesting to see how Chris Pinney used the Aadhaar card as a means of really looking at technology, culture, and identity. And these are very important issues which all of us actually are struggling with today. Photographers, visual artists, curators. When we're looking at identity and culture, it is definitely the internet, from website to artists to seeing works to even curating. Now even curating is being done in virtual spaces, and you do the layout, and at the press of the internet everything's done. So sometimes the curator hasn't even to be present at the exhibition, because everything has been done, and at the drop of a button, the whole layout of the gallery, how many square foot of space for which artist, it's a virtual space.
So I can see many fans of the internet between on this table. Let's go straight to the person who is from the internet. That's Amit from Google. And I have a couple of questions for you, Alka, later. Yeah.
Let me see if this works. Yeah. So I'm not from the internet. It's not like not from the future or something like that.
Google is the internet and Google is God, etc. So
thank you. That's a great introduction. The man from the internet. I'll remember that one. But I agree obviously with Alka and Sony and everyone here. I think obviously I have to agree, even if I think, for me, I think the main thing is that the question of does the internet need culture or the culture need internet, it's actually it's both ways, because I think there have been a lot of industries that have been disrupted by the arrival of the web and by digital technologies. And I think the
Hi everyone, welcome to our panel discussion this morning, which I think promises to be very interesting given the subject, which is, does culture need the internet? And as Suni told me a little earlier, that's a bit of a no-brainer, which of course it does, but we are going to discuss in what ways and what are the pitfalls, etc. Since Dinesh has already introduced everyone, I won't waste any more time on introductions, so we can get straight into the panel discussion. Before we actually start the discussion, I'd like each of the panelists to just tell us very briefly if they think the cultural world should engage very actively with the online world or not. So Suni, would you like to start?
Hi everybody. As I said, for me it's a no-brainer, because I think the internet is just the most amazing thing that has happened, and it's really the future. And from the first time that I started engaging with the internet to now, I mean, at the very basic level as a photographer, the fact that I can send my pictures to people sitting at home over my computer is a huge step for me. I'm enough of a kind of dinosaur to have been part of two technologies, analog as well as digital, and non-internet world as well as the internet world. And so I can compare both. And for me personally, I think it really is the future.
Alka?
Well, I'll take off from where Suni said dinosaur. I felt a dinosaur 14 years ago when I'd gone for my postdoctoral to Goldsmiths College and went to the library and asked them, where is the catalog? And they pointed me to the computer. And you know, all of you are very young here. You won't believe that 14 years ago, internet had really not become part of our everyday. It's as recent as 14 years. And I again looked at the computer and I was wondering where the catalog was, because I'm used to looking at cards and going number wise, and it took me a little bit of a while that at the real click of a mouse you got down